Jeremy Swayman finally signs on the dotted line with the Boston Bruins. The New Jersey Devils start their season overseas with 2 wins, and the Tampa Bay Lightning prepare to play without Steven Stamkos for the first time in a long time. We've got all that and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. The big news in Boston, goalie Jeremy Swayman finally ends his holdout, signs a new contract. Ian McLaren of Locked On Bruins here to talk about that. And Ian, how important was it for the Bruins to get this done?
I mean, it's huge. It was great to wake up Sunday morning, see the Bruins had posted a video of Swayman returning to the rink, pulling his hockey bag and his sticks out of his trunk. And with, of course, the trade of Linus Ullmark to the Ottawa Senators, having Swayman in the fold for the next 8 years, it's a signal that they are committing to a franchise goalie, and he has proved up to this point that he's up to the task. To go into the season with Joonas Korpisalo and an AHLer as backup, with a pretty tough schedule to start, would have been really tough. But to get Swayman back in the lineup before opening night, really huge for the Boston Bruins and the fans, of course.
Talk to me about the terms. Do you think this was a fair deal for both sides?
I do at the end of the day, yeah. I had always said that I thought he would come in around this range. It's the exact same contract that New York Islanders goaltender Ilya Sorokin signed last summer. Sorokin's a bit older. Sorokin does have a Vezina runner-up to his name. But if you look at save percentages among goaltenders who have played at least 100 games since Jeremy Swayman debuted, he's fourth in save percentage among that group, behind only Linus Ullmark, Igor Shesterkin, and Sorokin. So he belongs definitely among the highest paid goalies. He's now behind only Andrei Vasilevsky, Sergei Bobrovsky, Connor Hellebuck, and now tied with Sorokin for the highest AAV. Carey Price is in there as well, but he's not an active goaltender. And over the course of this deal, I think it will age very well for the Boston Bruins. There's going to be some guys, Shesterkin among them, who will be due new contracts. And it's very possible that, or likely even, that by the end of this deal, 8.25 for Jeremy Swayman could be very team friendly, in fact. So, I always assumed he would end up in this range. And based on his track record, based on what we saw in the playoff run just a few months ago, he is certainly up to the task. Obviously, a lot of people say, well, he hasn't had that A1 job just yet. I mentioned Ullmark being tops in save percentage over the past few seasons. But every time Jeremy Swayman has been in the net, you can see the kind of goalie that he is, that unfazability, and there's every reason to believe that he will remain a top high-end goalie in the NHL and help the Bruins to achieve their goals moving forward.
What does this mean psychologically in that locker room? I mean, the team struggled through the preseason without him.
Yep.
How does this affect the team psychologically?
I mean, it's huge. You can say, it doesn't affect them, or there's no impact during the preseason because it's kind of meaningless hockey. But you had some big time free agents that were signed this summer. You have commitments to core players like David Pastrnak, Charlie McAvoy, and those guys kind of all came into this season with the belief that Jeremy Swayman would be the goaltender as part of this core moving forward. if he were to have been traded or this stalemate had lasted past December 1st and he sat out all season, obviously that would be demoralizing for the team. And especially once the regular season got going. Joonas Korpisalo is still penciled in as the opening night starter to give Swayman some time to get back into the swing of things. But clearly it's a different mindset when you have an elite high-end goalie in Jeremy Swayman in net, or your second, third, even fourth option on the depth chart. So the guys probably won't say that publicly, but obviously it has to be a relief for everybody in the locker room for sure.
How much time do you think he'll need to be ready to play his first game? And does he get brought along slowly where Korpisalo may split time with him early on?
Possibly, yeah. I believe he has been keeping up with some on ice activities at one of the area universities with former Bruin Jay Pandolfo. So it's not like he's coming in extremely cold. Obviously, he doesn't have the game reps from the preseason or even NHL practice reps. The Bruins start the season on the road, and then they host the Montreal Canadiens in their home opener. And then they have a couple afternoon games next weekend, Canadian Thanksgiving weekend. So probably one of those games that you'll see him back in the lineup, maybe as early as Saturday, October 12th against the Kings, or maybe a Monday, October 14th game against the Florida Panthers. Maybe he gets in and makes his debut, the home opener against the Canadiens on Thursday. I guess maybe it'll depend on how Korpisalo performs in the season opener against the Florida Panthers, where the Panthers will be raising their banner. Emotions will be high, I'm sure. So all that to say, he's not coming in, frozen. He's coming in fairly warm, ready to go, and shouldn't take him too long to get into the swing of things, although there are some new faces in the lineup, some new guys on defense. So getting everybody on the same page might take a few days at the very least.
So you cross this off your to-do list if you're the Boston Bruins. What are the keys to a successful season this year for this team?
Well, they've definitely improved defensively as a team. And all throughout this stalemate, I've heard over and over again, well, it doesn't really matter who's in net for the Bruins because their defense is so good. But if you look at their overall team defense last season, it wasn't really that spectacular. It was below 50% in terms of shot attempts, shots per game. The goaltending tandem of Allmark and Swayman really bailed them out on a lot of occasions last year. They bring in Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov. That improves the team defense. I think it really comes to tightening things up defensively and getting at least average goaltending from Korpisalo in the games that Swayman can't go. I would expect Swayman will probably get 2 out of every 3 starts. And those games that Korpisalo comes in, he needs to be at least serviceable after a very poor season last year with the Ottawa Senators, so that there's not too much pressure. Even if you're a 1A goalie in the NHL today, it's not back in the day when a guy like Martin Brodeur would start 70 games kind of thing. So you do need that backup, and getting Korpisalo to that level is going to be key for this team as well.
Out of all the newcomers, whether they be prospects or guys that you acquired, who do you think will have the biggest impact on the team?
I think it's going to be Lindholm at the end of the day. We've heard a lot about him being in the same mold of a Patrice Bergeron. The Bruins got a lot out of Pavel Zacha and Charlie Coyle at center last season, but to be able to pivot Zacha to the wing and put Lindholm on a line with David Pastrnak, I think that's really going to give him a big boost after a pretty rough season last year, Lindholm, between Calgary and Vancouver, and open things up even more for David Pastrnak, maybe to get back more to raising those goal totals. Last year, he was having a big playmaker role. So to be able to have Pasta kind of more as a finisher and challenging again for 50, 60 goals, that would be big for them. And just it helps the depth all the way down the lineup to have a guy like Lindholm in there as well. So I think he'll be pretty key for the Bruins this season.
All right, Ian, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Locked On Boston Bruins, available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. The podcast is at Locked NHL Bruins on social media, and people can find me at Ian C. McLaren.
Ian, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Yep, always great to catch up, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can hire quality candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Devils, Trey Matthews. And Trey, 2 games that already counted for the Devils over in Europe, 2 wins. What stood out most in your mind in these 2 victories?
I think what stood out the most from the New Jersey Devils was the depth assets really coming to play. So in game 1, the Devils came out victorious by a score of 4-1, and players that had big impacts were Stefan Nason, Jonathan Kovacevic, Paul Cotter. Then in the very next game, they won 3-1. And once again, Paul Cotter, he had a good outing. Seamus Casey, he netted his first career goal, and it was on the power play, which was the Devils' first power play goal of the season. And Seamus Casey has been, I'd say, one of the biggest surprises for New Jersey because he had to earn his spot in Prague. He impressed during the preseason. He worked with pretty much nothing in his first outing against the Montreal Canadiens. And now look at him. He was given a Rolex at the end of the game because he was named the first star after game 2. So that's one way to kick off your NHL career. You get your first career NHL goal, and you also get a Rolex at the end of the Global Series.
Yeah, that's a nice bonus to get things started for sure. How about the goaltending? I mean, that was an issue last season for the Devils, and they give up only 2 goals in 2 games.
Well, let me tell you, Jacob Markstrom, he already is in contention for Save of the Year. You can book it. Game 1, he was phenomenal. And he only let 1 go past him, but that's okay. I care more about the win than I do the shutout. Jacob Markstrom, he looked really strong out there. Same could be said for Jake Allen. And honestly, the goal that Allen led up to Tage Thompson, I don't think that was really on him. And I think it was goalie interference, if I'm being completely honest. But nonetheless, both of them, Allen and Markstrom, were strong in between the pipes. That was also a need for New Jersey coming into this season. They needed stronger goaltending, and that's exactly what Fitzy did over the offseason, acquiring that sort of talent. And wherever Fitzy was inside O2 Arena, I'm sure he was smiling ear to ear because a lot of his offseason acquisitions have really panned out well so far. It's only game 2 of 82, so I'm trying to pace myself. It's still a very long season. The last time the Devils went 2-0 to begin their year was in 2021, and that season, 2021-2022 season, they did not make it to the playoffs. A lot can still happen, not trying to be negative about it, but I'm just saying it's still a very long season, but they're heading in the right direction.
How about the way the team played in front of the goalies? Because obviously, when you're talking about goals against, it's not all on the guy between the pipes.
I'd say that the Devils, and Sheldon Keefe talked about it in his press conference, the Devils did a good job of suppressing the Sabres because I'd say Buffalo had a tough time establishing themselves in their offensive end. They got off to a better start in game 2, but it progressively got worse. And I think that's exactly what New Jersey did in terms of defense, which is you play physical, you just make it that much tougher for Buffalo to set up shop in their offensive end. And one of my biggest takeaways after game one, physicality. And it's been a while since I've said it for this Devils team. I was very impressed with their forechecking. Let's look at an example. Stefan Noesen, he got the first goal of the season for the Devils. In fact, he got the first regular season goal in the entire NHL for this season. But how did he get it? He had an excellent forecheck, and then he maneuvered himself in front of the net. Nobody was on him. Kovacevic saw the open lane, dished it out to Noesen, and he had a point-blank shot. And it was poetry in motion, picturesque. And here's the thing. I got to pat myself on the back just a little bit. I said I was rather impressed during preseason with Naison's outing. No one was really talking about it. I said, look, Noesen is forechecking. He's being aggressive, and his net front presence is going to be big for New Jersey. Lo and behold, the first goal of the season for the Devils is courtesy of Noesen, thanks to his forechecking, net front presence, and his stronger hockey IQ.
You mentioned Kovacevic a couple of times. He's played well in the first two games. You think the coach will learn his name soon?
Well, I'll be honest. I always say, in order to play hockey, you need a confusing last name that nobody knows how to pronounce. But in all honesty, I should thank the Montreal Canadiens for Jonathan Kovacevic. I should also thank them for Jake Allen, because I said Jonathan Kovacevic was a very underrated get for New Jersey, because he was actually quite good with the Canadiens. He led them in a lot of statistical categories. I know he was up there in defensive point shares rating. He led the team in plus minus. He had a decent amount of blocks, hits. I said Kovacevic, if he's given a chance to appear in a few games, he might surprise you. Yes, he's not Brett Pesce. Yes, he's not Brendan Dillon. But Jonathan Kovacevic was very underrated, and all he needs to do is replace the productivity of Kevin Ball, and he can do that. So I think Kovacevic is one of my players to look out for going the rest of the way. I was rather impressed in his Devils regular season debut.
How does the trip to Europe affect this team now that they have to come back and adjust to the time zone?
I mean, they're professionals. Here's the thing. That's inevitable throughout the rest of the year, because you might have to travel to Los Angeles, and that's on Pacific time. And then the very next day, you're going to have to go back to New Jersey, and you're 3 hours ahead. I mean, I've done a fair share of traveling. I'm sure you've done a fair share of traveling too, Gil. I don't think it's really going to affect them. It's way too early in the season. Now, as the season progresses, and I think this is the case for every team, fatigue and travel will catch up to you. It's inevitable. We're all human at the end of the day. But in all honesty, I don't think that's that big a deal. They don't have to play for another few days. They'll be fine.
Season now underway for the Devils. Who are some of the key players that will be the most important to the team's success this year?
I wrote an article for this for Pucks and Pitchforks, fan-sided. I guess everyone knows what to expect from Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, Timo Meier, Dougie Hamilton. Those guys are well-established NHL players. I guess you're asking me like someone that people might not really talk about. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go with Dawson Mercer. Mercer actually looked pretty good in the first game against the Sabres. He walked away with a point. He got an assist. The thing about Mercer is that he's coming off of a subpar season in which he posted a lot of career lows. And there was a huge contract dispute. In fact, we talked about it here on this platform a few weeks ago. I said, it's not a matter if, it's a matter of when will a deal get worked out. He held no arbitration rights. It was the end of his entry-level contract. It just came down to money. Mercer had no power in this case. And I'm just like, all right, he's got the contract, but here's the thing. He's got to perform. Because if he doesn't, the Devils, they need to focus on Luke Hughes' contract come the end of this season, and then Shimon Nemitz's contract at the end of next season. So Alexander Holtz is gone now. there's no longer a scapegoat for this Devils team in terms of who might see their name in trade discussions. But if Dawson Mercer does not get off to a decent start to the coaching staff's liking or the front office's liking, he's going to get that Alexander Holtz treatment, which is you're going to see your name in trade discussions every single week.
Yeah, and some players take that as a challenge, and some players have problems with it. We'll see if it even comes to that. Trey, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
You can find me on X or Twitter at TreyMatt4, and you can find the show's X page app at Locked On Devils, and you can watch or listen to Locked On Devils wherever you get your podcast from. Also available on YouTube, closing in on 2,500 subscribers right now. Hope to get that up as the season progresses.
All right, Trey, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you get to place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And this is a great time. Check out all the latest odds on FanDuel. You've got the baseball playoffs, college and pro football in full swing. Hockey gets underway this week, hockey fans, so check out all the hockey futures and the latest odds for your favorite team. Again, get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. It is my pleasure to welcome to the show the host of Locked On Lightning, Josh Sperber. And Josh, let's start off with this. This is a different team than it was a year ago. Obviously, no Steven Stamkos. First of all, how is this team looking to you as we get ready for the start of the new season?
I mean, for a team, especially for a team that lost their star player, one of the best players to ever put on a Lightning jersey. I mean, it's what I've been talking about really since I've hosted the show. They look surprisingly good. There's a lot of young players on the team, but there's still enough guys that were on the squad last year. And I was actually at the most recent home preseason game last week, and the first line got their first action of the year. And they really looked like they didn't skip a beat with Jay Gensel on that left wing, a spot that has been taken by Steven Stamkos for the better part of the last 2 decades. I mean, they do really seem to be gelling well for a team that lost such an important player. There's a lot of young guys that I just really like watching in preseason because you could tell that these guys see kind of an opening. They can see that there's a chance to get themselves a spot, carve themselves into the Lightning rotation, and they're really taking it. I think it's going to be a really fun team this year because you've got a lot of guys who are hungry to get some NHL ice time, and that is just going to make this season really, really interesting for the Tampa Bay Lightning in the beginning of their post-Steven Stamkos era.
So who are some of the guys who have stood out that you feel can make an impact this year?
Well, I mean, Connor Geeky's certainly one of them. Obviously, that fight kind of might change some things, but I still think he is someone that can make a really good impact. But it's been the defenders mostly that have really impressed me. J.J. Moser, who was in that Sergachev trade with Connor Geeky, he's expected to start with Victor Hedman on defense, and he's playing on a different side of the ice than he usually does, but you can't tell by looking at him. You can only tell because that's what, articles on Sports Illustrated and any other thing that you read is going to say. But it really doesn't look like he's skipping much of a beat. Emil Lilleberg is someone that has kind of been a two-way player, just been one of the younger guys, minor league call-ups in the Lightning system over the last couple of years. He signed his first one-way NHL contract in this offseason, and he's looked really solid. He's had a goal in preseason. He's contributed to some of the offense. But on defense, I really like that he is so physical because that is something I think is missing on the Lightning side of things for the most part. They're getting out hit in just about all their preseason games. And I think Emil Lilleberg can be a guy on one of those lower lines who can really provide some energy, playing some good physical defense, laying down the hit stick when needed. And I think that the Lightning defense is kind of underrated. There's just a lot of under the radar guys that I think can make an impact for Tampa this season.
You mentioned Jake Gensel. How is he fitting in, and how do you think he'll do in his first year with the team?
I mean, it's really hard to tell from one game, but he looked really good, just streaking off that left wing, finding himself open nice and getting shots on goal. The Panthers just had great goalie play the last time that they were at Amalie Arena, but it really seemed like that was going to be the game that Gensel was just going to come right in there and get a preseason goal. Had a couple of shots that both got stopped, but he's someone that I think can fit in really well on that power play. And it just makes the wing play on that first line especially incredibly explosive with him and Kucherov coming off of either side. And I think that, his goal scoring ability can allow Kucherov to be more of a passer and really just kind of be the quarterback of that offense from the right wing. And Gensel's just going to have to find some open ice, but I think he can get into some really good positions and be a massive asset for the Lightning this season.
With Steven Stamkos no longer on the team, who steps up as a leader? I would assume Victor Hedman would be one of those players, but who do you expect will have to step up and fill that leadership void?
Well, I mean, I think Hedman has already, in a lot of ways, filled it up. I mean, he was right there with Stamkos. He plays 32 games this season, and he breaks Stamkos' record for the most all-time games played by a member of the Tampa Bay Lightning. So he is someone who, I mean, it's obviously hard to replace a guy like Steven Stamkos, but a lot of the leadership void, per se, can be filled with Victor Hedman there. So I think he's already done a really good job of that. I mean, with everything he's done off the ice in the wake of Hurricane Helene as well, I think it shows that he's going to be a really good captain. Nikita Kucherov with the assistant captain role, I think needs to step up. Ryan McDonough getting that assistant captain after coming back from a couple years, not with the team. But again, he was with those Stanley Cup teams a couple years ago. So I think he's someone that really needs to step up as a leader as well. And honestly, I think Jake Gensel too. Jake Gensel, Braden Point, really the rest of that first line, I think, just needs to increase their production and increase their leadership, because beyond that first line, it's a couple veterans here and there mixed in with a lot younger players. It's a very young Tampa Bay Lightning team. So pretty much anyone who's been with the organization for longer than 3 to 5 years really needs to step up as a leader. But if we're getting specific here, I think Hedman needs to keep doing what he's doing, the alternate captains as well. And Braden Point is someone who I identified in Locked On Lightning as someone who I'd really like to see break out this season for Tampa, maybe get into the triple-digit point-wise like he is certainly capable of, particularly with his goal scoring.
You mentioned Connor Geekie and his suspension. Talk to me about the play and how does this affect him going forward. And I mean, it's a preseason suspension, so I don't anticipate it'll affect the team much going forward.
I mean, the only reason that it might affect the team is because he's suspended for the last game of preseason. And the Lightning, just before we started recording, the Lightning announced that they've cut their roster again. They're now 3 players away from the league minimum, typical the last week of preseason. And this was really, I thought, Connor Geekie's chance to shine. I'm getting ready to go to the game tonight, and I was excited to see Connor Geekie again, just because he's been, everything as advertised. He's been that top prospect. He's made some really exciting plays, and the fight was just him protecting his captain. Nikita Kucherov got hit with a roughing penalty after Josh Davies had an open ice hit on Victor Hedman. Kucherov immediately steps up and protects the captain. After the ensuing unfortunate power play goal that came from that, Connor Geekie came in and just shut down Josh Davies, really gained a lot of respect among his teammates, and even some of the coaches just going right in there, sticking up for his captain, dropping the gloves and just dominating the fight. I mean, he's really got a shot to get himself on the NHL roster still I don't know how much the suspension hurts that, just because he's already shown so much in the preseason. But that's the only thing that concerns me. It just, to me, a suspension this late in the preseason makes it seem a little bit more likely that he starts the season with the AHL.
Season's coming up. Biggest reasons for concern, biggest reasons for optimism for the Bolts.
I think the concern is pretty obvious. You know, it's not easy to replace a guy like Steven Stamkos, and you can see all sorts of good things in the preseason, but NHL regular season ice is a different animal. So I think just kind of getting over the loss of Steven Stamkos is going to be a key theme of the season for at least the first half for the Tampa Bay Lightning. But Connor Geekie and a lot of these young guys are some reasons for optimism. You can already tell that the Lightning are gelling really well together. The team chemistry does seem to be there. It's just the only really negatives that I've seen in preseason have just been young guys who haven't gotten the NHL experience, and then some of the regulars that have been there for the past couple of years still shaking off the rust. But I think once that's done, once these guys are more comfortable together, more comfortable in this kind of new look Lightning roster, some of the young players have gotten their feet wet in the NHL, I think this can be a really sneakily dangerous team. There's a lot of talent with the Tampa Bay Lightning, but the concern is just that they're a younger team. So I think that there's certainly the skill to make this Lightning team a contender. It might not be to the Stanley Cup effects that many Lightning fans have expected over the past few years, but this can still be a playoff team. You just don't know because it's so untested.
Josh, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Well, you can see down below, my X is at Josh_Sperber, at Josh_Sperber 5 on Instagram as well. Locked on Lightning's also on Instagram and X, LO_Lightning. And you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, anywhere you listen to podcasts. We're here for you. And if you're a Lightning fan, let's talk. Let's get ready for the season together and enjoy this ride.
Josh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Gil. Have a good one.
Thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank my guest, Josh Sperber from Locked On Lightning. I want to thank Ian McLaren of Locked On Boston Bruins and Trey Matthews of Locked On New Jersey Devils for joining me today. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of Locked On NHL, and I also co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. Don't forget, Locked On NHL is here for you every day, Monday through Friday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the National Hockey League. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for watching and listening to the Locked On NHL podcast.